Have you ever wondered whether or not critical thinking is relevant to your practice as a music therapist? I have thought about it, and I really think it is. I really think it's important that as a profession, music therapists begin to transcend what is already a strengths-oriented and humanistic form of practice and bring it up to the next level, which very naturally to me seems to be to embrace critical approaches to practice. So in the next couple of minutes, I just want to give you a bit of an overview of what that means, critical thinking and music therapy, and let you know about an upcoming seminar, online seminar that I'll be hosting. In doing that, I need to start by acknowledging that the land on which I am making this recording belongs to the Wurundjeri people, and that it is and always has been Aboriginal land. It's important to acknowledge that, particularly because I'm white-skinned. And being white-skinned in Australian society means that I have access to privileges and resources that are far greater than my Indigenous fellows. And if I'm going to start talking about critical thinking in music therapy and locate that in Australia, then I need to acknowledge that this land was colonised more than 200 years ago, extremely violently and aggressively, in a way that resulted in the slaughter of the vast majority of the Indigenous population at that time. And therefore, when I speak from my whiteness, and I acknowledge that I'm limited in being able to understand what barriers and impediments stand in the way of other people who don't have the privilege of white skin, but that I aspire to better understand that through bringing in a critical conversation. You know, being cisgendered is another one of the privileges that I bring to this conversation that I need to acknowledge. And that means that my personal identity and gender agrees with my birth sex. And that makes life comparatively easy for me in society, because society endorses that kind of correspondence between my birth sex and my gender identity. And so as a white cisgendered person in Australian society, I have a lot of privileges that I bring to this conversation that I think makes it important to be having this conversation, and that people like me are willing to be in the conversation. Of course, I am a woman and I'm also a single mum. So in terms of that aspect of my identity, I have experienced the oppressive nature of the structures which hold our society together. Because indeed, I live in a patriarchal system, and sexism is still abundant in most aspects of daily work, life and pleasure. So I have some sense of that positioning as a woman and a single mum, combined with my white skin and my cisgenderedness. And also the fact that I'm middle class means that I've had access to a solid education, which was free when I was growing up. And I've had access to those kinds of structural resources, which mean that I've been able to climb the societal structures despite my gender, being a woman, and despite being a divorced single mother. So that's the positioning that I bring to a critical conversation. And I bring it up, not just so I get to tell you all about my life in a slightly apologetic way, but because in critical thinking, what it's all about is actually acknowledging that all people do not have access to the same degrees of power. It's that fact. And that if we don't name what power we have access to, then we're effectively suggesting that we are the same as other people, instead of acknowledging that the intersection of different parts of our identity have a huge impact on what happens to us in the world, what society does to us, what society allows us to do. And that's true as a music therapist, and it's true of the people that we work with. And it's important to recognise that when we have privilege, that means that we might be able to, and indeed are able to, access greater levels of power. So when we have critical conversations, we need to be thinking then about how does my identity, how does the intersection of the different aspects of my identity differ to the people with whom I work in the disability sector or in the mental health sector? How do my resources and privileges differ from theirs? And therefore, can I really understand what it is that they want to get from agreeing to work with me in music therapy? When I write goals about improving their communication skills or social capacities, is that really what the people I work with want? Or are they more thinking about playing the guitar and having fun and having a good relationship with somebody in a way that isn't dependent on words? And what does that mean? If the people I work with have different goals from me because they are positioned in a different way from me and they can see things differently, what does that mean for my practice as a music therapist? It's tricky. It's uncomfortable. And it's very difficult because you start to feel how societal structures are very restrictive. Because whilst I might be cool with people wanting to play the guitar, my boss might not want to pay me as a therapist, as an allied health professional, to play the guitar with people unless I've got some health-oriented goals that rely on my expertise and my university training, which is why they're paying me the dollars that they're paying me to work with those people. I'm not just a friend who's turning up in their lounge room to play some guitar. So therefore, how do we negotiate as music therapists this distinction between different amounts of power being given to different people? It's really interesting. You know, it's really common to feel uncomfortable. It's really common to feel guilty, but that's no excuse for not taking action. That's not an excuse for not just acknowledging that, being uncomfortable and progressing anyway. And thinking about what does that mean? What kinds of compromises am I making on a daily basis? And how can I negotiate with the system so that that becomes less problematic? Because in fact, critical thinkers are critical actors. It's not enough just to think. It's not enough just to notice. The world's not going to change just because you've noticed sexism, because you've noticed racism, because you've noticed ableism. The world isn't going to change from that at all. What's going to change the world is people taking actions in that direction. And music therapists have just as much possibility to do that as anybody else in the world. And in fact, the social movements that are going on all around us suggest that the time is now for us to acknowledge that, and that not acknowledging that is actually deeply problematic, because we may be complicit then in making sure that these oppressive structures stay in place simply by our not taking action. So it's not easy. And I'm no expert. I wasn't brought up thinking critically. I was brought up in a small country town in rural Australia where sexism, racism and every other kind of ism, homophobia was all at play. And I've slowly become frustrated. I've slowly learned to see and to listen and to study and to think about what it is that I'm doing, and then to have thoughts about what we might be able to do. Along with all of the wonderful people doing PhDs at the National Music Therapy Research Unit and the students that come and train in our Masters of Music Therapy program, we've all together, and my colleagues in the music therapy field, we're all together trying to grapple with this. How do we go from being a strengths-oriented humanistic practice and up-level that, take it to the next level, which incorporates critical thinking and means that what we're doing is of even more benefit to individuals and to the world at large, so that we can create a more equitable society. In Australia, it's really important that everyone gets a fair go, but it's very hard, actually, to make that happen without a great deal of effort. So if you're interested in that conversation, we'll be having a longer seminar where we break that down, particularly in relation to working in the fields of disability and mental health, where I have experience, and thinking about the language that we use, the goals that we write, and who are the great thinkers in the field at the moment that you might want to go and look up afterwards. So I'll try and bring all of that to you if we get the opportunity to talk again. Thank you.